this is going to be a beginner-friendly tutorial for Cinema 4D and Redshift render. I'm going to show you how to use simple modeling techniques to create this room, as well as downloading free models from the existing Cinema 4D asset browser, as well as free resources online. I'm also going to show you how to easily add materials from the Cinema 4D asset browser so you don't need to build any materials from scratch. And in part 2 of this tutorial, which will be a separate video, I will show you how to add some simple animations. Without further ado, let's go. Alright, we're inside Cinema 4D and this is the project file that I prepared for this tutorial. We're going to replicate it in a blank file. So let's go to New Scene and let's start off with a cube and also with a human figure. So we have a reference on what the scale should be approximately. We should always try to imitate real life scales for the best results. So let's make Y 4,500 millimeters, 4.5 meters. That's usually a good size for a room in terms of height. And then for X, let's make that 6,000. And for Z, let's try to give it 16 meters for now and see what happens. So I think this is more or less a good size. We could get rid of the figure, press delete. And then in order to make the hole in the window, we want to intersect this cube with a cylinder. While having the cylinder selected, press R on your keyboard to go to rotate mode. Hold shift while dragging the rotation circle to snap it to exact numbers. Turn it to 90 degrees. Press E on the keyboard to turn it back into move mode and drag it so we intersect with the cube. While having cylinder selected, we could manipulate the size. So I'm going to make the radius 1.5 meters. And I'm also going to increase the, not height segment, but the rotation segment to 32. See what I did under display. I'm going to go to Goran shading lines. So here you can see that these segments are increasing, and by increasing the circle, we have a smoother edge. In fact, let's make this even smoother to 48. And then I'm going to add a bool operation into these two shapes. So press Shift C on your keyboard to bring up the search command, and I'm gonna type in bool. Now let's drag our cube and cylinder underneath the bool, and we want the Boolean type to be A without B. So now this is working perfectly. This is what we want. And now we want to add a bit of thickness into it. So again, pressing Shift and C. Let's type in thicken. And we can drag this whole Boolean onto our thicken operation. And we can increase the thickness to something like 500. And now we have our room. But before moving on to building the other stuff, there's a slight annoyance that we have to fix whenever we use the thicken tool like this. So if we go back into our full window view, you do this by clicking the middle mouse button, or you click this right hand side little icon here, and if we select the thicken, you notice that the shape is not quite right. And to fix that, we want to switch from basic to advanced, and now the angles are correct. I don't know why it does that, it just does. So now let's build our table and shelf. And staying on this full window view, let's build a new cube, and then we can drag our cube over to roughly where we want it, and let's first manipulate it using the yellow dots and also the arrows to place it on where we want it to be. And also on the front view, we'll just manipulate the thickness. And then let's type in a more exact number. And we have our desk. So I think the design that I had in my desk, there's a slight angle here. So if we want to do the same thing, we have to make our desk editable. So selecting the cube, press C on the keyboard to make it editable. And if we now go to our edge selection tool, we can select the edge we want to manipulate. And right now, you'll notice that these angles are at a funny angle. To fix that, we press this icon here called coordinate system, and we turn it into the world system. And then we're just going to drag it up to something like this. Maybe this is too thin. I think something like this looks good. And then going back onto our model mode, let's create our shelf. So let's create another cube, go back to our 4-window view, and we'll repeat the same procedure. So actually we wanted to have the same length as this table, and if I correctly recall, I think the length was 5,000. Just get it more or less correctly. With a project like this, preciseness is not essential. We're not doing a precise product video where the exact measurement is important. So for now, it's a practice kind of beginner project. We can get away with not being super precise. But if you're on a professional client project, then of course you want to be more careful than I am right now. I just wanted to show you the techniques. All right. So right now, yeah, we actually want it to be a bit further in. Even more. And this looks a bit too high right now, so something like this looks good, I think. Again, let's round out the numbers. All right, so we have our shelf here. By the way, let's name all our layers, which is always a good practice. So in order to name the layers, while having the object selected, press enter on your keyboard. And this is how you name your layers. And then let's put it all under a no to organize the setup here. So press no, and then while having everything selected, we drag it into our no, and let's rename this objects. And then let's make the shelf editable by pressing C. And we want to erase this front face here to make our shelf. So let's press our polygon selection mode, select the front and press delete. And we want to add a thickness just like previously. So press Shift C on keyboard and add thicken and drag our shelf underneath it. So let's adjust some of the settings. So thickness 100 is okay, but let's adjust the position of the thickness. So minus 100 will make the thickness go within, and if we have it at 100, it will have the thickness go outside of the original polygon. So let's make it minus 100, and again, let's make it advanced. And actually, I think it would look nicer if it was a little bit thinner like this. Let's call it 75 millimeters. And then in my original design, we have actually this slant here again, like the table. So I'm actually creating similar design language in the two furniture. So in order to do that, we want to press C on the thicken. And we can drag our shelf out of this node and delete this. And just like I did with the table, I go back to the edge mode, select the edge, and drag it down. And then finally, let's build out the landscape we have outside. And to do that, we go to, where is it? Here we go, landscape. So right now, it's clearly too small, so let's make that bigger. Go back to model selection mode, and we'll drag this out until it looks like something more to the right scale. And we can also manipulate the definition to make the landscape smoother. And we can manipulate how the hills look with these settings. And we can adjust the seed to create random shapes until we find something we like. I quite like this. All right, now is a good time to set up some lights and camera. This is a Redshift tutorial, so to ensure Redshift is selected, click this icon here, the render settings, and make sure Redshift is selected as the renderer. And as for our output, I have it as 1920 by 1080, which is 16:9 ratio format. And also I have it at 24 frames per second, which is a cinema frame rate. And it goes from 0 to 144 frames, which is 6 seconds in total at 24 frames per second. Okay, so I'm going to select our window here and then press camera. And then what's going to happen is that Cinema 4D is going to create a camera angle at whatever scene I selected here. And we want to manipulate the camera because right now it's not looking straight onto our window. So what we want to do is press the square. And what that does is that now we've locked onto this camera mode. So now that when we move this camera, we're going to see how the camera affects it. And if we don't have it selected, we can see that it doesn't work. So let's have our camera selected. And in order to center this, we want to manipulate our settings here. So for X, we want to make that 0 in order to center it out. And let's just give these more even numbers. And for these rotational values, make this 180. And our P to be 0. So now we're looking straight onto the camera. And with this view, we're seeing some problems with our scene already. I can see that our table, it's a bit too high. So I'm going to Whoops, what's going on? I'm going to move this down to somewhere here. And also I can see that our room right now is too narrow. So let's go back into our cube object and make this wider. So we want to manipulate our X to 7.5 meters. And then let's select our shelf and table and just move it back accordingly. And we can also change our focal length of our camera to something less wide, like 50 millimeters, to give us a more compressed look and feel. Those of you who are into photography, this should be familiar to you. And having our camera at the back of the room seems to make it look quite nice in terms of composition. All right, now it's time to add some lighting into our scene. So let's bring up our render view for a moment. So pressing Shift and C again on the keyboard, type in RS render view, and then it will come up. If you press play, it will show you the latest render of what's going on the scene. So right now, obviously we don't have any materials and we don't have any lighting. So let's change that. So under this area here, let's bring up a dome light. And you see that immediately the scene has brightened up. So what a dome light does is that it just creates a massive dome around your scene, covering all the objects in the scene. So what we want to do is add a texture onto our dome light, and this is where our asset library comes into play. So press this icon here called Asset Browser and just search for HDRI. And then you find all sorts of different textures here that will give you different lighting results. So think of them as just different scenery. So a sunset scenery will be different from a sunrise scenery, or a midday scenery, or an outdoor scenery would be different from a indoor scenery, just like in real life. So maybe let's go for something like this, because the outside will be a desert, like kind of like a Martian desert look, and this seems to be appropriate. So double click it to download it, and then we'll drag it onto our texture here. Wait for it to update, and then we can see that it's working, and we even see the image of the HDRI. So to turn that off, we click off the background here, and we can increase the intensity to something like 3 to brighten it up. And then under coordinates, we can manipulate the direction of the dome light by dragging this along. And you can see that we can make the light come into our room like so. All right, let's leave that for now. And then next we want to brighten up the room itself. And to do that, the easiest way is to add an area light. So an area light is just a flat light that is shining into your room here. So I'm just gonna turn off the asset browser and turn the camera to a perspective mode so you can get a better idea of what it's doing. This is our area light, and it's right now facing this direction, which is what we want. And we see that it has immediately brightened our room, maybe a little bit too bright. So under object, we can lessen the intensity a little bit. So making it 50 or even 25. Let's go for somewhere in the middle, like 40, so that contrast is a little bit stronger. We may have to adjust it later, but we can see that my modeling earlier wasn't exactly too precise. So let's move these shelves and table over. So selecting the layers, I'm just going to drag it over now it meets the wall. And I'm also going to just drag the shelf over a little bit so that we see this thickness showing up over here. All right, next let's add a sky. So under here, let's add an RS sky, and that will give us a standard blue color on the sky. But since we're going for more of a sci-fi June look, we can change the color under sun and change the tint to maybe something more yellow or orange. Something like, maybe something like this. And then lastly, I always like to add an RS environment into the scene when it makes sense. So basically this adds a layer of fog onto our scene. And right now this is too strong and we need to turn down our scattering to something really low. So 0.001 maybe. Maybe even lower, half of that. Maybe even lower. Let's say add another 0. Okay, so this gives the whole scenery a softer look, a more cinematic look. And just to keep things organized, let's move all of these lights into a new node and name this lights. All right, let's add some materials onto our scene using the C4D asset browser. So the asset browser can be accessed through this icon as like before. And then what we want to do is we want to go to materials and we can select all sort of materials from these lists here. And we want to make sure we select materials with this Redshift icon here. So these are Redshift materials. And we want to add a plaster material to our walls in this case. So I'm going to find one with the color and also the texture that I like. And in this case, I'm going to use plaster rough sand. I'm going to double click it and it's going to get downloaded onto our material browser here. So I'm going to turn this off and then I'm going to turn my display into quick shading and I'm just going to drag my material onto our walls here. And you can see that the material has been applied. And right now it's a little bit dark and we can turn up the intensity or we can also make the light bigger by dragging the yellow dots and making the light itself bigger. And now it's still a little bit too dark, so we can turn up the intensity a little bit. Maybe we can use just 70 for now. What we can do is that we can also use the same material on the mountains. So I'm going to copy and paste the material and I'm going to drag the new material onto our mountain. And we can manipulate the color of the mountain by double clicking the material here. And down here, we can now adjust the color using a color picker. So I'm thinking of making it kind of orangey. Obviously inspired by the new June movie. Something like this. And right now the colors seem a little bit soft and I think that's because we have too much environmental fog right now. So if we turn this off, we can see that the color's a little bit stronger. And what we can do to lessen this is that we can turn down the levels of how the lights react to the environmental fog. So in particular, the area light, we can click the area light, go to details, and we can turn down the volume. Let's make it 0.25, and that will decrease the amount it gets affected by the environment. So as a comparison, this is lighter, and this is darker. So let's keep it 0.2 for now. Okay, so I did something bad. C4D crashed on me, and because I was so into doing this tutorial, I forgot to save the project regularly. So I had to go back and rebuild all the stuff we did so far, and that's why now it looks a little bit different. So I apologize about that. But that's a major lesson. Make sure you regularly save your project or turn on autosave. So we just applied this plaster material on our room here. But what if we want to apply a floor material that's different from the walls? So to do that, we need to make this whole room editable. So in order to do that, let's first archive this layer in case we want to change the properties like the size of it later easier. We have an archive that we can go back to. So let's create an archive node, and while pressing Control on the keyboard, we can drag this up here to make a copy, and by turning these dots red, we can hide it both from our model view and our render view. So now we only see this layer here, and we'll press C on the keyboard to make it editable. And now, while having the polygon selection mode selected, press the floor, and let's look for a nice wooden material. So we'll go to Material tab, go to the Wood tab, and we can drag this thing down here to make it bigger or smaller. So I just double click this one, and it's downloaded onto our material asset browser, and I'm just going to drag it onto our selected surface. And whoops, that happened because our plaster wall material right now, it's on the wrong layer. We just need to drag this down. And there we go. We now have the plaster wall and a nice wooden floor. Okay, now let's add some models onto our scene. And again, we'll use our handy C4D asset browser and see what we can find. So we want to add a little plant on our left here, and we're gonna search for plants on our model tab on our asset browser. And just like with the materials, whenever you see a Redshift icon on the model, that means it's a model with Redshift native materials. And of course, that's preferable to non-Redshift materials. But I'll show you a workaround just now for those models without Redshift materials. So first, we want to find a plant pot. And this is the one I used in the previous example. So I'm going to double click it to download it into our scene. And you see that it has now appeared onto our scene here. And I'm going to drag it onto the right position. And as you can see, it is way too small right now. So on the coordinates, I'm just going to increase the scale. This is the S, which stands for scale, to something like 5 times. And you'll notice that the materials right now looks weird. It's more like a bronze material. That's because, as I said, this is a non-Redshift material. So I'm just going to delete this. And I'm also going to delete the plant and soil because plant materials, it's a little bit complicated to create in Redshift, and in this tutorial we're not going to create any new materials. So to apply a Redshift material, we'll go back onto our materials tab, and let's search for a terracotta material. So this one is a Redshift material, as you can see by the icon here. I'm just going to double click it to download it onto our material editor. There it is. And I'm just going to drag it onto our plant pot. And there you go. We now have a terracotta Redshift material on there. And in order to get rid of the ones we're not using, go to Edit, Delete Unused Material. And now let's find a plant model which has Redshift materials already. So I can search for plant Redshift and look for something. And maybe we can go for something like this, a Cantia palm, because we're in the desert. And now we can drag it onto our plant pot. Yeah, that's the right position. And the plant looks a little bit too small right now. So let's make it bigger. Let's say 1.5, 1.5. That looks good. And I'm just going to create a new node and call this plant and drag both the pot and the plant under this new node. I'm just going to delete this original plant node. We don't need this anymore. And if we select the node, we can drag both of these objects together. And something like this looks good. All right, now I'm going to show you how to find free models online that you can download for your project. So I like to use the websites Turbosquid and also Sketchfab. So we'll start off with Turbosquid. I'm just going to search a stool for my scene here. And then on the right hand side here, we want to sort by lower price. And you're going to find all these free models that you could download for your project here. So for this project, I used this chair here. I've included all the links in the YouTube description, so you could download the same ones if you want to. But once you found the chair that you like, you could download it. And then it's going to take you to this download page here, where you can find what kind of project file you want to download. And in this case, we want to download OBJ. In some cases, you can also download the textures, but in this case, we want to use our own Redshift textures, so there's no need. And then going back onto Cinema 4D, we want to drag our OBJ file onto our Cinema 4D window, and this window is going to pop up. We just need to press OK. And in this instance, we have two chairs for some reason. And also they're separated into two objects. So what we want to do in this case is select the first layer, go to our polygon selection mode, go to rectangle selection, and just drag and select these polygons. Try again to delete everything. And then do the same with the other object. I don't know why these objects are not getting selected. Okay. So sometimes with these free models, they can be a little bit dodgy, but you get what you pay for, right? So now we want to have this control axis at the bottom of the stool, so it's easier to move and scale. So what we want to do is have the stool chrome, basically the leg object selected. Press Shift-C and search for axis center. Press Enter. And we want the point to be 0% at X, 0% at Z, but minus 100% on Y. When we execute, it's going to go down here. But the parent node is still on this layer here. So going back into the stool chrome object, bring back up the axis center, and we want to select parent 2. So now when we click the parent node layer, it's going to go back up. It's going to match this node. So let's press copy and paste it onto our scene. And just like with the plant, we can manipulate the position. It's too small right now, so let's make it twice the size. That's a little bit too big, so let's make it 1.8. Bring up our RS render view, press play, and we have our chair. Let's rotate that and just make sure it's touching the floor properly. And now let's add some materials onto our stool. Go to materials, go to metal, find a chrome material, double click this. Make sure the stool chrome is selected. We can delete these materials now. We don't need them. Delete unused oops. Delete these four materials. Drag it onto the chrome. And now we have a chrome stool. And then let's find a fabric for our chair. So maybe this cotton blue fabric, and drag it onto our seat. And maybe we can make it a little bit lighter. Okay, so this particular Redshift material doesn't allow you to change color from here. So we don't want to go into the node editor for this tutorial. So let's find another one. Delete the previous one. Double click. And yes, this one we can manipulate the color. So just wanted to make it a little bit brighter. There we go. And now let's check out Sketchfab, where we're going to find our old school Macintosh computer. So search for the thing that you want. In this case, it's the Macintosh 128K. And we want to click downloadable. And the one that I downloaded for free, I think it's actually this one. Yes, that's right. So yeah, check out the model in the 3D browser here and click download the 3D model. And in this case, we want to download the GLB file because that will include the texture. You see here, texture size 1K. So download it. Let's drag our GLB onto Cinema 4D, press OK. And let's rename this layer computer and then copy it onto our scene. And it's way too big. So let's make it smaller. 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, and it's still way too big. So let's halve the size. Nope, still too big. Let's make it 0.02 and see how that goes. That's more like it. Place it on the desk. Press S to zoom in onto the object, and let's rotate it. Press E again to select the move tool, and it could be slightly bigger. Okay, that looks good. And let's bring up RS render view. Okay, that's what it looks like right now. So let's rotate our computer here. So let's check out the nose. It's quite messy, but it's correctly named. Sometimes they're not. They might not be, and you might have to do a lot of digging. But while having the computer node selected, press R to rotate, and we'll just rotate our screen sideways. and we can move it closer to the wall. So we were able to see what's on the screen better later. And of course, you see that these cables are no longer connected. And what we can do for the sake of simplicity for this tutorial is to just delete them, because maybe this is an alternative reality where the Macintosh was able to figure out Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. Whoops. There we go. So I think all of these keys are separated into different nodes. So without spending time organizing them, I'm just going to move the whole thing and then move the computer node a little bit back. Okay. That's good. And now let's turn the screen on. So going into the computer node, we'll find the computer screen, select this material here, and then if we go to our material manager, we'll find the screen material. If we double click this, clicking on the material node and go to emission, we can find the color we want it to emit. So in this case, let's make it blue. And you can see that now, we have this blue color coming on, which is quite nice. So this concludes part 1 of the tutorial. I'm not gonna spend time finding and downloading all the other models that was included in the example project. I've included the links to that in the description below. Feel free to find your own models to populate your own scene. In part 2 of this tutorial, which will come out soon, or it might already be out by the time you watch this, I will show you how to add some simple animations, fine-tuning, and adding some content onto the computer screen. Stay tuned and see you next time.